forgot it takes about 30 seconds.
Yeah, if anyone's got her number, maybe text her. Neither.
All right, we're live.
Okay.
History, Stongo. I'm Elisa Harkins. I'm Bear Clan, and my tribal town is Coweta. I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, which, because of a historic Supreme Court decision, is now recognized as being on the Muskogee Creek Reservation, land back. I am the curator of the show You Are Hiliswa, currently up at Atlanta Contemporary, which is located on the ancestral lands of the Muskogee Creek. Today, it is my great honor to introduce Patrick Freeland, whom I invited to exhibit Muskogee plants as part of the exhibition in the Secret Garden. Patrick Austin Freeland, Wind Clan of the Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma, serves as an educator and communicator committed to action to promote the advancement of community and educational institutions through the integration of plural knowledge systems, employing excellence in design, and leading innovation through adaptation. Through interdisciplinary sciences, arts, and engineering, Patrick's vocation seeks to integrate living systems and contemporary knowledges as a means of addressing significant environmental challenges through cultural revitalization and community engagement. He currently serves as a natural resources instructor at the College of Muskogee Nation and leads the Muskogee Cultural Gardens, which seeks to continue Indigenous Muskogee traditional ecological knowledge, as well as to integrate modern agrotechnologies for synthetic, chemical-free food production, increasing biodiversity, and ecosystem restoration. Patrick is also the director for the Lichen Knowledge Sharing Network, Centering Indigenous Knowledge Systems Project, and leads the buildingafire.org website, which offers freely available resources licensed under Creative Commons to support Indigenous and non-Indigenous climate educators and students. Patrick continues to engage novel and creative endeavors which span the boundaries of healing and peacemaking, community advancement through adaptive management, utilization of media and information technologies, and intercultural communication. For today's program, I would like to share one of our traditional Muskogee hymns. This is Es Pogides Omis Gethiskos, or This May Be the Last Time, We Don't Know. This song is at least 200 years old. It traveled from the South, Atlanta area, to Indian Territory, which we now call Oklahoma. Espogides, oh, meis gethyscos. Espogides, oh, meis gethyscos. Megusa paake apeyana espogides o mesquetescos. Espogides o mesquetescos. Pamapal Tage Apeyana Espogides o mesquetescos. Espogides o mesquetescos. Jawan Dage Apeyana Espogides, o mes, que theiscos. Espogides, o mes, que theiscos. Espogides, o mes, que theiscos. Meadow. Thank you. So now I will hand it over to Mahaya Freeland, who can introduce our special guest, Meadow.
Ooh, Lisa. Do want to take a moment and really think about the nature and the context of this discussion. We say this word halishwa, which, it means medicine, and it's not necessarily like medicine like pills, but, it's something deeper. It's something that has this, spiritual and almost ceremonial connection. And I think that when we kind of open this space, having, those old songs is very important. It reminds me of that specific song. We were always told there is no Muskogee word for goodbye, right? Simply I'll see you later. But even more than that no matter what, we will see each other again. So Maro Lisa for that song. So for this exhibit, it was, Lisa had come to me. We were actually in a Mrs. Marshall's knowledge class, who hopefully will be joining us shortly, her language class. And, I just kind of taken this role as a natural resources instructor. And I'd say my real focus now is as an ecology instructor, but, asked if I would, help out with this project. And, it seemed, really like an amazing opportunity. And so something that I've been really passionate about for quite some time is this idea of ecosystem restoration. But from a Western lens, a lot of times the concept of ecology is very exclusive of human beings, right? And so when we think about restoring an ecosystem, it's not just the plants and, not just the animals or cleaning up the water, reducing contamination, but really reconnecting to place and the knowledges and the peoples that come from that place. So right now at the Atlanta Contemporary Museum, there's, a display with some different plants growing in the secret garden. And some of them, there's more than the 9 that are shown here. And, they all have a connection to this place. They were here, along with us. And, you find these, in Oklahoma, you find them all throughout down into the southeast. And so there's 9 here. And with Mrs. Marshall's help was our, an original speaker. We were able to find the names, and sometimes that's the thing is you look these up in a book and the names might be wrong, right? Because history has the problem of being written by the victors, as they say. But I always kind of push back against that and saying, well, if we're still here, were they truly quote unquote victorious? And so kind of like looking at these different plants. So there's kambokaji, which is a kind of like a mint variety. And it's also I think verbena is what what the botanical name is. And acipasa, which is the same one that's on the UR Halishwa display, which is the yapan holly. And Kvachkathako, which is one of my favorites. That's also known as horse mint or bee balm. And I see this one growing on the, like just on the side of the road all the time. Beautiful kind of pink purple flower. And Ola, which is a buckeye, that's the second row on the left. And it has these really pretty pink flowers. And, you don't see them too often, but when you do, they really stand out. You've probably seen like the buckeye nut too. And Iji, which is Indian tobacco, which isn't this. It's not the same as you would see the commercial tobacco. It's they're relatives, but this one's Nicotiana rustica. Its botanical name. And Ajena, which is the eastern red cedar. And Ms. Sanders will be talking about that one, as well as Wiso, which is also known as sassafras, and Awana, which is a specific type of willow. They call it the one that grows by the water. And then I'll talk a little bit more about pusli, which is also known as purslane. Interesting because that's, you hear about these different names of different plants, and this one happens to be an English name that was derived from Muskogee name. And so for this talk, there was this kind of flow to it, but beginning with, this idea of first reverence. We're talking about such things. It's, we opened with that song, but it's important to understand, this is more than just an educational or an academic pursuit. This is something that's talking about who we are, and really to all those that are watching that maybe, Muskogee peoples are just peoples, to really understand and reflect on that idea of reverence. And so I'd like to introduce now Mahaya Marshall, who's a language instructor and the lead of the Native American Studies program at the College of Muskogee Nation, and someone who has been a really powerful, I'd say definitely relative that I can look up to whenever I visit at the college, someone that was very warm and open to me, and I'm eternally grateful. So, Mahaya Marshall, would you like to talk with us a bit?
Hello for the introduction, Patrick. Reverence is such almost a trite word when you say it in English. In the Muskogee language, it is athakwitska, which means we give all due respect, which means we hold it in high regard, and things that are sacred to us are ajagi. Ajagwijida means to put things in a sacred context. So those Muskogee words hold more value than the translation that comes into English, because it is a way of life. It's not just a patty cake and move on concept. It's an everyday thing for most of us that have grown up with all of these. We had all the medicinal remedies, the herbal cures. We did not have hospitals or clinics or doctors or nurses. We had our family, and they were well-versed, very knowledgeable as they went into the woods to seek these. And there are certain times that you approach the medicines and you do it in a very respectful manner. It's not something that you can just run down to Walmart and grab something and come home. This is something that is, it's a soul search as well. You have to search deep within your soul as you're using this, because you cannot misuse our medicines. You have to do it the right way, or it will come back in another way to you that is not so good if you misuse those. So I will stop here, but I appreciate the reference you made to having that reverence for what we do.
Ooh. So thinking about this idea of having, that Tlakwitchka, that respect for our these plants is not just things for us to use, things for us to take, but really as relatives, right? And so, Mahaya Sanders, would you maybe speak to us a bit about this this idea of relationships?
It's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you all about is when I think about relationships, I actually think about care. I think about taking care of others, taking care of one's community. Well, we have to give reverence for the plants because for the most part, when you think about the world of nature and for Muskogee people, we owe a lot to plants. They've given us everything. So in turn, it's our responsibility to take care of them. When we're young, there's a story often told to Muskogee children about the importance of care for plants. If the plants are cared for, they'll live and thrive. But if they're not cared for, they will disappear. One thing about it, as scientists, we can talk about plants being wild or domesticated or even cultivar, things that we've taken from other places. But in context towards plants, there are times in the natural setting that we need to recognize why they're there and also the needs of those plants and how they're met. When talking with elders, you'll hear about how certain plants may be growing in the wild, but it's the responsibility of indigenous persons to care for that plant. You may harvest that plant for the needs of family or community, but you must only take what is necessary. Now, I know that there's kind of a troubling context towards the theme in mainstream called the rule of thumb. But when I heard about one of the plants that I'm going to talk about today with you all, weso, is that you, rather than a thumb, you want to think about your smallest finger. Everybody's got a different sized hand, but the idea is to take the minimum that you need. Any harvesting must not harm that plant completely or allow for new plants to be present in that area. So what I'd like to talk to the group about is weso and ajena. Weso, incidentally, is a plant that has part of its roots removed and bark when the Muskogee utilize that plant. It makes for a perfect example for being cautious to not harvest too much. And again, when I think about it, my hands are pretty small. I usually tell people that it's about that idea of measurement is you want less than an inch. You don't want to take the main part of the root of the plant if you need to take something from it. Some individuals, they'll harvest bark as well. When you find weso or sassafras, this is a tree that has leaves shaped like a glove or a hand. And this is also my segue. Mr. Freeland, if you would like to pull up the picture of the weso. So this is a small little plant inversion. And from what you can tell, I know that it doesn't have the same number of lobes on the leaves because it's a smaller plant, but you can tell that they almost have the image from the standpoint on the leaves of being like fingers. So when we talk to children about recognizing this plant, it's almost thinking about how it's relevant to one's hands. And sometimes that's also how you can classify it when you're looking for it as well. And the other thing about talking about the leaf being shaped like a hand, it can remind us that the leaf is a teaching tool for children about sustainability. It's about care, it's about practice, the things that we need to take care of those plants. Saying some things to them, such as we use our hands, even when they're small, to care for the earth and its plants in the same way we would pat a family member on the back. From an ecosystem perspective, there are some types of medicinal plants that you'll find by the side of the road or in a ditch or an area where water is present. Areas that we wouldn't even think about that would be necessary to live and thrive. But these plants do it in an efficient way. When you find weso, they're often in thickets, areas that would be the equivalency of a ditch, small encompassed areas that have a lot of vegetation. And like some wild plants, one thing about it is from traditions and accounts that they've said, it's been up to the Muskogee people and Muskogee women especially to have the task of finding the plant and clearing out portions of the thicket to allow for that plant to live and thrive regarding weso. And it was never the intention to remove all of those plants. Every botanical out there does have a purpose. These can also be taken, allow for them to have enough room to grow and thrive. for this new growth, it's also relevant to the thought about how we use the WISO too. The WISO is something that we use to purify one's blood. When it comes down to it, when it comes to clearing the growth in the area of the thicket, it's also an idea of clearing things out. It can be a hope to begin again. So they say that WISO is used as a blood thinner or purifier. Some individuals, they also use it as a purgative, and they drink it as a tea. But again, it's just about taking that time for purification to start again. We begin anew and a continuation, as it were. I'll talk a little bit more about WISO in just a bit, but I want to refer to Agena just briefly. Agena or cedar is used in smudging, inhaled or intaked as medicine. With the classification of red cedar being an invasive species, at times, well, cedar gets a bad reputation, although a beneficial plant. Unlike that of WISO, one thing about Agena is it's used in purification, and it's to gain insight. And Agena can also be found near clearings of forests. Or just about everywhere you can find a forest or a stand of trees, you can find eastern red cedar. One thing I'll tell you is that Muskogee, we do have to be mindful about where and how we harvest Agena. There's certain plants that have prayers and songs that have been passed down through generations. If we don't have those, there's a need to seek those out and have that benefit for harvesting. If we don't have that, at the very least, we can have those moments of silence and prayers to have that opportunity to thank the plants for their help. I'll give you an example of being mindful when one gathers Agena. But one thing about it is we have an abundance of eastern red cedar because of the encouragement that certain types of birds and other creatures have gathered them and scattered them about. But one story that I'll tell you has to do with my father. Several years ago, he used to volunteer to find missing Indigenous graves. And one essential piece of advice was given to him is that cedar trees were often planted near graves. One thing about it is that we wouldn't want to necessarily harvest near a gravesite. We want to be respectful of those areas and why the tree was planted. So it's a need to be mindful about where you're at and also the context by where the plant is growing, as well as being respectful of the plant in general. Now, at CMAN, we do get moments to discuss the importance of plants and their care for our students. And sometimes these discussions involve sharing. When the students recognize the plants, it can assist them in understanding the nearby communities with their ecosystems and interactions. And there's some cases, once they start seeing that plant, they see it more readily and it becomes quite relevant to them. One thing that I've heard from some of my students is that they've shared when they were younger, they would often see these WISO trees more often where they would live. But now it seems like these trees are fewer in population. There's fewer out there. As scientists, I want to inspire those students to determine their own opinion, influenced by traditional knowledge, and also scientific data as to what they might be thinking is causing this depletion or the decline of such plants as the WISO. Could it be soil? Could it be water, or even air quality that's influencing that growth? If we could determine the causation, perhaps we could slow this environmental loss progression. This is also a segue to our next talk by Mr. Freeland, who's going to be sharing events about climate, but I've got one last thing about the WISO. This is more of a teaching context for it. So when we talk about the hands with the leaves, we talk about with children, even if you have small hands, you can still do your part in taking care of one another, taking care of the plants. Like the leaves and the hand teaching talk for children, we also can take into account our own steps, our feet. It doesn't matter how small our steps that we take on the journey of life. We journey on this path together. Caring for the plants is also part of that journey too. So when you come across the leaves of the sassafras, I hope that you remember the purpose of hands, purpose of the leaves, the relevance of the plants, and how it's related to sustainability. And may you travel far, or in our language, Ayamongche.
So thinking about looking around and seeing these different plants as relatives, and for some that might seem really natural, right? And I think for others it can be a very very strange thought, right? It's like, might seem it's some, new age philosophy, but arguably it's something that's been embedded within all of us as human beings since we were, first kind of able to speak. When we first had our first breath. And so when we think about the way that we should and ideally would care for our relatives, there's a sense of responsibility. A lot of times, if you think about how our elders sacrificed for this generation, right? You think about Muskogee peoples that, like about 5 generations ago, forcefully removed from places like Georgia, right? My peoples and Sita peoples were from kind of south, like Old Muggy River, about halfway between Old Muggy and the where Atlanta is now. But going back there today, there's many that don't even realize that there were Native peoples there, let alone don't even realize that there's Native people still there. And so understanding our responsibility to each other as relatives, I think, can be easily thought of as understanding their name, right? How awkward is it whenever you're in a space and you can't remember someone's name and you're like, well, hey, you, and and it can be disrespectful, right? So just as importantly as learning the names of these plants, it's that first introduction. And so whenever you know something by name, you have a connection to them. And as they say that these plants will speak to you, that's not a that's not a metaphor. It's like anything that whenever you acknowledge it, it will acknowledge you back. Arguably, reciprocity is a key component of our human experience. And so when we take care of something, it takes care of us. Even in some of the old Eastern philosophies of kind of early Japan, there's an old Zen saying that, when you feel helpless, to help others. And there's a reason that this is something that is ingrained with Muskogee peoples, but arguably like many indigenous peoples and the many peoples of this planet, that we have a responsibility to the lands around us. And so even little things like, picking up after yourself, keeping it clean, not trying to limit your pollution and things like that are all collectively absolutely crucial. So when we think about climate change, it's a very complex topic, and it can be very easy to do what they call standing on top of a burning platform. You can stand up and you can point it. It's like, the weather patterns have changed. Tornado Alley has moved eastward. We're seeing significant drought globally. We're seeing, heat waves that we've never seen before. Well, our world is changing, but one thing that, if we keep in mind our connection to this bigger system that's beyond just humans, but with our relatives, we'll find they have a lot of power as well. Recently, there was a study that suggested that in order to prevent large-scale ecological collapse by 2050, that we need to conserve 44% of Earth's land and surfaces. Now, if you're kind of thinking in a powerless mindset, you think, well, that's so much, and what can really be done? But the way I like to think of it is, think if you have a yard, that's only 44% of a yard. And then if you think about that too, like, something that especially Americans tend to do is we mow the lawn. We go out there, we cut that grass short, and and sometimes I would, in my classes, I would talk to students and I would say, it's like, well, why do we mow the lawn? I'd let them think, and a lot of times they would say, like, well, it's so it doesn't look bad. And I would say, well, why would plants and things like that look bad? And they would say, well, because they're weeds. And then usually I would take them outside, we'd go walk around in some weeds, and I'd ask them to just kind of like start looking at those plants, count them. How many different plants are there, right? And so it's not just grasses. And then we would take some of those plants and we would take a bunch of pictures, and we'd find out what's their botanical name, what are those English names. And then we would spend some time in thinking about, like, well, are there some Muskogee names to these? And a lot of our language is, I wouldn't say it's been completely lost, but it takes more connection to people to re-access and to revitalize. But soon we would find out what are often perceived as being weeds are actually, they're something that could be used medicinally, or something that could be food. And so this is why I think that when we think about ecological restoration, it's more than just doing something for preservation of the plants and those landscapes, but it's for our own preservation, right? And thinking about that, literally, if you just let a lawn grow for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, it will become a stable ecosystem. In ecology, they have things called succession. So that first it's grasses, but then you'd see what are called forbs, forbs and woody species. And these are, things like that Kachakathako and others, like especially like mint varieties, things that flower, right? And so things like the insect decline, since 1980, there's been a 40% decline in the world's insects. And they say that roughly a third are currently endangered. And that can be very frightening. But at the same time, who's driven past a field that was fallowing out? And then if you just pause and just listen for a minute, you hear, clicks and, whistles and buzzes and all the sounds of these different creatures in their living. And so to simply let nature do what it does and grow will also help those insects to come around. And so that can be a hard sell. I think as human beings, we can be very stubborn at times. If we were taught something, even if it was the wrong thing, sometimes we'll keep doing that thing because it can be so frightening. There's nothing more frightening to the human consciousness than the unknown. But to do something seemingly different, or something that's seemingly wasteful or unsightly, and so I think there's an art in deconstructing some of these bad ideas. There is a skill to actually doing, things like prairie restoration, or things like, turning a lawn into more of what you'd call a permaculture space. But it's not that challenging, and arguably just living it alone for a certain amount of time, and it will revert to what it happens to be. And so I'd like to show you an image. Hang on just a moment, please. So this is Pussley, also known as purslane. Now this is an interesting looking little plant, and I took this in over in the alley. I live in downtown Tulsa, which if you've ever been there, it's about 100-year-old buildings, and below the asphalt there's actually a big layer of brick. It's been really hot and really dry downtown, but look at this little Pussley. Look how well it's growing in seemingly harsh conditions. Now, no one planted this. This has been in what they call the seed bank, just in the soil. It's there, just in the dust, and it's actually thriving. And I walk around and I see these everywhere. Now that I know its name, they almost seem happy to see me, just as happy as I am to see them. Now, this plant is also has some medicine abilities in terms of, like, if you see, it's got the kind of the reddish, kind of the thick stems. That if you were to take part of those, and you take the smaller ones, and then you can either split it in half, and then there's like a white milk that comes out. But if you have really bad stomach problems like diarrhea or things like that, it's the same as a kind of like a Pepto-Bismol, right? It's not necessarily an antacid per se, but and it also has some effects if you have, like, say, like, maybe some stomach parasites, it can help you pass those. But those big luscious leaves are, what they might call a superfood. They're loaded with vitamins. You can eat them. They taste pretty well. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend eating these if they're growing, in the alleyway next to the dumpster. But I always think of this, and I think of this idea of resiliency as also being a metaphor for, perhaps who we are as, as Muskogee peoples, a diaspora, peoples removed that, tried to kill us, in so many ways. And but here we are, despite the, seemingly inhospitable conditions, and despite all odds, not only can we grow, but we can thrive. More than that, because we're thriving, we're actually, like, so what happens in the roots of these is they really encourage, especially anytime it rains, they really encourage different microorganisms. So, if, let's say, that humans disappeared tomorrow, within 20, 30 years, this would be very, very rich soil where these grow. Right. And so this facilitation that this plant is providing to the soil, we can also think of this as a metaphor for ourselves. That we can understand that, as our climate changes, there are many natural processes that lead to this, like the sun is growing in luminosity, although that will be very slowly. Our planet moves on 3 axes, which can change, the different climatological patterns. But it's our collective impact. There's 8 billion human beings on this planet right now. And all of them are, living, breathing, eating, and relying on all these other systems. And we know that as humans, we can impact this planet. And as irresponsible as we may have been, if we know that we have power, and we can also know that we have responsibility, and that with effort and in good relationship with, the plants, the animals, the water, the weewa, the air, that over time, we can heal ourselves and heal our relatives and around us. Now, there is an old saying, and I don't know the culture it comes from, but they say the wisest of men plant the seeds of trees in which they'll never sit in their shade. And I think about that. Sometimes I think, as modern Americans particularly, we have such a desire for instant gratification that things can seem so hopeless and pointless. It can be, intoxicating to embrace a nihilist worldview, like, oh, nothing means anything, there's no point. And, a lot of times we can, easily feel discouraged and depressed and heartbroken. But I think that there's much healing, and our plant relatives are the ones that can offer this. And then they also need us, right? Just like I said, they'll talk to you, but they will connect with you, and we take care of them, they take care of you, but they're happy to do so. And so, kind of thinking about this idea too of a responsibility, I think, as individuals, and I identify as, Muskogee from my mother's side, but, I also have French ancestry from my father. I also have, actually, on my Muskogee side, Irish ancestry from generations back. But I think we have a responsibility to acknowledge ourselves as peoples in plural, that we come from many peoples all over this world, and that because of that, we have a connection. We have a connection to the land. We have a connection to the waters, the landscapes, the seascapes. And the more that we can recognize that connection, and then and understand that we are peoples, that we also have that responsibility of learning our histories, knowing and knowing the truth of our histories, right? It can be also really easy, I think, to romanticize some of these backgrounds that we may have, and think ourselves, like the idea of Native Americans being this, the noble savage is the language. But no, we were people, right? We had lessons to learn, and I think that the more that we can understand that and honor our peoples, the more powerful and the more responsible we can become. And one of the best ways to do this, of course, is to relearn language. So when I was a little bit more of a backstory, so my great grandmother Um, her name was Peggy Swina Berryhill, but when she was a child, was sent to the Eufaula Indian boarding school, and there's still kind of a boarding school there now. Back then, it was a place that was designed to purposefully and intentionally get rid of the culture of who she was. She was horribly abused. She was not allowed to speak her language. And raised to be this, like, I think Western ideal of what a woman does. You make food, or you cook, clean, have babies, and nothing else, right? And really, treated really poorly. But I grew up with her when I was, my great grandmother, and she was born in 1900, and I don't all remember her words, but I remember what she used to say. And, I remember being a little kid, about 3 years old, and we were walking through the woods, and we put our hands in the water, and then we'd follow streams just as far as they would go. And so she was kind of telling me, well, this is who we are, and this is how we're connected. And so that love that she had for me and for where that was coming, that was, like that little footsie growing in the dirt. So some things are really hard to destroy, love being one of those things. And my grandmother, Beulah May King, she again wasn't raised around her language, but she took the time to relearn it. More than that, she took the time to advance Muskogee knowledges in the form of a cookbook, and also kind of like, during the 1670s with the American Indian movement and restoring, like, sovereignty to our tribe, was, kind of a hellraiser, there on the front lines, making this sort of stuff happen. But the same deal, that love, that she loved my mother, Cecilia K. Freeland. And my mother, always wanted to be an artist too. And the same deal, wasn't necessarily raised around, the language as a first speaker, but took time to emphasize what was important, things like that, compassion. And so now, as I find myself as an adult, I recognize that I also have a responsibility, to not only to do this work that, and my mother's the one that really, encouraged me to go through college and to keep going and to focus on, she used to say, you have to get your degree so you can help the earth. And that's what kind of kept me going in some of those dark times. And so now, I take that time to relearn the language. And when I first started working at the College of Muskogee Nation, I started auditing, Mahia Marshall's language class, and that's where I met Elisa. And so I've learned, I'd say, like maybe twice as much language than I knew when I got there, and then hope to continue to learn more. And so I think that there's a lot of power in tribal colleges too, as ways to not only advance Native peoples for their livelihoods, but to advance these knowledges, language, our connection to these plant and animal relatives. And so I think that stemming from responsibility, of course, now is we have an opportunity for revitalization. And so, Elisa, if I could maybe call on you and maybe kind of speak to your experience of doing that, taking on that responsibility of revitalizing language.
History. Hello. Sure. Yeah, I started studying Muskogee language several years ago at the Muskogee Community Center, and our dear Don Tiger was my teacher, my first teacher, and in my first class, he said, "Hokti, come here, I want you to learn this song." And he gave me Hizagida Mazit Legis, which is the one who gives us breath, or God our creator. And he said, "I want you to go home and learn this song and come back and sing it for us next week." And so I did. And then so then I started going to church services with Don Tiger and going to baptisms and other functions and singing for him, different hymns. And about a year ago he passed. And when he passed, I said, well, I think it's time for me to get my degree. So I enrolled at College of Muskogee Nation to get my certificate in Muskogee language because I would like to be a Mahaya someday.
Oh. Well, Mrs. Marshall, you opened us up in a good way, but what sage advice can you give us to be better?
Well, that was a very beautiful tribute, Elisa. And the legacy is now yours to carry. My vision for my people is not just the holistic food system, but it's the healing that you have mentioned. We have to heal not just physically, but spiritually and mentally and emotionally. And the herbal remedies were given to us for that healing process. Weasel is good for your blood. And there are people who still drink the ajena as a tea, similar to the green tea that people buy in the store. But there is a purification process as we use our medicines in a good way. And so my vision for the Muskogee people and all Indigenous people is that we come back to our healing physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and even financially. Because it's not all about money, but our people have always been blessed and well-to-do enough to share with other families. My mama always kept gravy and biscuits on the stove, just in case somebody was going to drop by that would be hungry. That was just my mom. We always kept coffee going night and day because many people came to our home. And they were looking for that. So this, what you mentioned, Patrick, about all of our relatives, not just people-wise, but the plants and the animals and the earth, our Muskogee elements, our wiwa, our water, our tutka, our fire, even the hodali, the wind, and especially igana, the earth. When the nutrients are taken out of the soil, people have a higher incidence of cancer. When the minerals are depleted, you see a lot of sicknesses and diseases come upon people. The people who have arthritic conditions, whether it's osteoarthritis or the rheumatoid arthritis, there was a time when people would eat gold dust to get those minerals back into the body. The weasel purifies your blood. It takes down the blood pressure. It cleanses your blood of the sugars, the blood sugars that go into your, that go into diabetes later on, as type 2. And lately I have been drinking weasel just because it makes me feel so much better. I feel healthier. I feel younger, and it does, it energizes you. And we have to do that for each other. So we learn as Indigenous people to grow old gracefully. And Miss Sanders, Mr. Freeland, Miss Elisa, you are also young right now. Just grow old gracefully. And you will be happy. You will not need money to be happy. You keep singing, Alyssa. You were gifted to sing. Carry that song in your heart with you everywhere you go. And Patrick, you were on a journey to bring that restoration to our people. And Miss Sanders, you have been taught well by your grandmother and your parents. That I hear a lot of our students say she's a very smart woman. And they don't say that lightly. You know, they respect your wisdom and your integrity and your love for what you do. And I know that if it were a ball game, they would not go up to bat against you, Miss Sanders. I know that. And same with you, Mr. Freeland. You know, we would be an awesome team, wouldn't we? And we are an awesome team because we are united in our heart and in our minds and in our spirit. Your spirit, your Puya Victa. Your Puya Victa is where it all lives. So we got to keep it clean, don't we? We've got to have that clean spirit. We've got to walk with that integrity, that love for learning and sharing. Because when you get to my age, you find out you don't know it all. You know, when you're 20 years old, you think you know it all. But when you get to my age, you find out that you don't know it all. And you share that with the ones who do. You know, the ones who have come to the gleaming whiteness of the head. We don't get gray-headed without the wisdom to go behind that. So that's coming for all three of you later. So as you find that gray, just love it and appreciate it and know that you have been given wisdom. You didn't come into it by yourself. It took a lot of people to bring that to your plate and to your table and to feed you in the right way. So our medicines, they are good. They are still good. I know I remember what my great uncle said. He was the medicine man for 3 ceremonial grounds up until about the age of 92 before he passed. And he said, when you begin to take the medicines, you have to do that throughout your lifetime to help you. So we can't just let it go by the wayside and not grow anymore. And what you were sharing about the purslane, those things grow under extreme conditions. Trees that grow straight up, they fall over in the storms. But the trees who are moving and twirling and being almost gnarled like rheumatoid hands, those are the strong trees that bring that healing to us. It has to go through the hardship like we go through. And as we go through hardships, we have to know that there are younger ones who are tender still. You know, they're at a very tender age. They have tender hearts, tender spirits. And so we have to be strong within ourselves to be able to help those who are still tender in their lives. You know, in our family, we've got a little 3-year-old boy. He's just as tough as they come. You know, and his generation, it's Incredible Hulk. You know, he's got everything green that you could imagine. Green is his favorite color. Blue was initially that when he found Incredible Hulk. You know, that's his generation, looking for heroes. So they look for that as heroes. But to us, we look to those elders who have that knowledge and expertise. And I know we're running out of time. But Alyssa, you stay strong and you stay with it, girl. You're doing a good job. I'm very proud of you. We don't always say that out loud, but I'm very proud of you.
Widow, thank you. Yeah, I want to just express gratitude and thanks to College of Muskogee Nation for allowing this webinar to happen, and also for having such amazing teachers and knowledge holders. Mahaya Marshall is my language teacher. I'm very proud to say. And yeah, haven't taken classes from Mahaya Freeland or Mahaya Sanders, but they have both been very generous in giving me different plant knowledge for different exhibitions. One was at Woodward Park, where I showed different seeds, and then at Atlanta Contemporary, Mahaya Freeland is showing yaupon holly, willow, hyssop, tobacco, buckeye, horse mint, eastern red cedar, yellow root, crossvine, purslane, fleabane, violet, Solomon seal, echinacea, and sassafras, which is a lot. Those are all our traditional plants and medicines, and they're from Atlanta, but we have brought them to Indian Territory or Oklahoma. So I just want to say that, College of Muskogee Nation is amazing. And if you haven't heard of it or are interested in learning more, you can go online and check them out. If you are Indigenous, it's free, and there's free food, and they also give you free laptops, and the faculty is incredible, amazing. So please check it out. Widow. cmn.edu is where you can go. Thank you, Mahaya Marshall.
Hello. Ms. Sanders, we got a few minutes left. Would you like to say anything?
As far as taking care of the plants, I know that we have to think about balance. So it's balance in our own lives. It's going to echo what others have said. It's thinking about how we can balance the adequate areas of nature for those plants, and just paying attention to what their needs are and how we can help them.
Oh. Well, again, Elisa, thank you so much for your leadership with all of this. You know, you're a wonderful artist. You have really amazing music. It's one of my favorite morning time, get up and going songs is that peyote song. And thanks for being who you are. And, I'm very grateful to know you all and to consider you all colleagues. And so, I think that for all those that are watching, find out more about the College in the Muskogee Nation, and and reach out, try to get connected, and, go outside. And like I said, there's apps now. You see a plant, find out its name, even if it's its English name first. But the knowledge is there, and all you have to do is have that spirit. But together, we will have to do this together, but we will find healing. So thank you. Maro.
Widow.